The story you're referring to is likely about Queen Ranavalona I of Madagascar, a 19th century monarch often remembered as one of the most ruthless rulers in history. While the burning of thousands of men alive might be an exaggeration or mythologized version, her reign is indeed marked by extreme cruelty, mass executions, and brutal suppression of opposition. The terrible story of Queen Ranavalona. Who was she? Ranavalona I ruled the Kingdom of Madagascar from 1828 to 1861. She came to power after the death of her husband, King Radama I, and quickly established herself as a powerful and autocratic ruler. Reign of Terror. Suppression of Christianity. 1. Of her most notorious policies was the brutal persecution of Christians. She saw the spread of Christianity as a threat to Malagasy traditions and her absolute power. Converts were tortured, executed, or enslaved, often in horrific ways. Some were thrown off cliffs, while others were burned or boiled alive. Biblic 2. Executions were common. The Tangena ordeal. Ranavalona revived an ancient Malagasy trial by ordeal called Tangena, where accused individuals were forced to eat a poisonous nut. If they survived, they were considered innocent. If they died, which most did, they were guilty. It's estimated that tens of thousands died from this practice during her reign. Forced labor and death marches. Ranavalona launched massive building projects, including the construction of roads and palaces using forced labor. The most infamous was a 250-mile road built through rugged terrain. Tens of thousands of laborers died from overwork, hunger, or were executed for slowing down. Isolationism. She closed off Madagascar to most foreign influence, expelling missionaries and traders. This policy, while preserving Malagasy sovereignty, came at a high human and economic cost. By the end of her reign, it's estimated that between 20% to 50% of Madagascar's population may have died due to executions, forced labor, famine, and disease, many directly linked to her policies. Despite her cruelty, some modern historians note that she preserved Madagascar's independence for decades by resisting colonial forces. She remains a controversial figure, seen by some as a tyrant, and by others as a fierce nationalist. Of Queen Ranavalona I's terrible reign, told with vivid storytelling to convey the horror and complexity of her rule. The blood-stained throne of Madagascar, the terrible reign of Queen Ranavalona. The royal palace of Antananarivo loomed like a watchful beast atop the hill, shrouded in the mist of the highlands. Beneath its stone gaze, an entire island trembled. Queen Ranavalona I, cloaked in red silk and iron will, ruled not with justice, but with fear carved into flesh and bone. The trial by death. Tangena. Each morning, the people gathered in the royal square, their faces tight with dread. Accusations were as common as whispers. A man suspected of treason, or even speaking with a missionary, would be brought forward. Before a silent crowd, he would kneel and face Tangena, a poisonous nut from the Cerbera odolum tree, crushed into a vile potion. He must swallow it, along with 3 pieces of chicken skin. If he vomited all 3, he lived. If he didn't, or worse, if he died, he was guilty. By Queen Ranavalona's command, thousands faced this fate. The numbers? At least 3,000 deaths per year from the Tangena ordeal alone in the early years of her reign. Even by the 1850s, long after international condemnation, the death count remained horrifyingly high. She didn't just use Tangena as justice, it was her scalpel of terror, cutting out dissent like a surgeon with no mercy. The war on faith. Christian converts were deemed traitors. One account tells of Rafaravavi Rasalama, the first Malagasy martyr. She was speared to death in 1837, refusing to denounce her faith. Others were burned alive in pits or tied to stakes and roasted in front of their families. Children were taken from Christian parents and re-educated in traditional beliefs. Some were thrown off the cliffs of Ampa Marinana, a name that still echoes with screams only the wind remembers. Ranavalona declared, "Never say, she is only a woman, and so she cannot do anything. I am a woman, but I am the equal of a man." And so she was, but not in compassion or kindness. The march of death. The Queen dreamed of roads that connected the highlands to the coasts, palaces that shone like the sun. But dreams came at a cost. Tens of thousands of men, women, and even children were pressed into forced labor. With no food or rest, they were made to carry heavy stones across hundreds of miles of treacherous terrain. Those who faltered were left to die. Foreign observers reported fields littered with corpses, vultures circling above as if the very land itself were sick with sorrow. One road alone, the 250-mile Fianarant-Soa route, claimed over 10,000 lives. Isolation and defiance, Europe knocked on Madagascar's door with ships and crosses. She slammed it shut. Missionaries were expelled. French and British envoys were scorned. Western weapons were seized, but their ideals were burned alongside the bodies of the faithful. Some said she was mad. Others said she was brilliant. She held off colonization for over 3 decades, ruling as a flame that scorched anything foreign, and much of her own land. Death of the Queen Ranavalona I died in 1861 in her bed, untouched by the justice she denied so many. When word of her death spread, the people of Madagascar celebrated in silence, afraid even in her absence. They feared her. Ghost might overhear. Legacy of blood and fire queen. Ranavalona's name still cuts through history like a blade. Was she a monster? A patriot? A woman corrupted by absolute power? She preserved Madagascar's sovereignty, but at the cost of hundreds of thousands of lives. Her rule remains one of the most brutal in recorded history. Even today, some Malagasy whisper her name with reverence, others with hatred, but none forget it into the final years of her reign and the complex legacy Queen Ranavalona I left behind. The narrative continues. The queen who outlived her enemies by the 1850s, the winds of the world were shifting. Colonizers encircled the African continent like wolves waiting for the weakest to fall. But not Madagascar, not while Ranavalona the Relentless still breathed. The French called her La Reine Cruelle, the cruel queen. The British missionaries who had once worked closely with her husband now watched in horror as she reversed every modern reform Radama I had put in place. Despite their efforts to plead for mercy, to reintroduce medicine, education, or diplomacy, the Queen's answer was always the same. No foreign gods, no foreign rulers, no foreign ways. Even within her own court, whispers grew louder. Ministers feared her. Spies were everywhere. One wrong move, one overheard thought, and a man could disappear into the stone cells beneath the palace, never to be seen again. Her son and heir, Prince Rakoto, secretly hated her reign. Fluent in French, he wrote a desperate letter to Napoleon III, asking for help in overthrowing his mother. It was smuggled out of the island, but intercepted before action could be taken. Ranavalona discovered it. Rakoto lived, but only because she needed an heir. The prince learned his lesson. Survive now, change things later. Madness or genius, Ranavalona's brutality wasn't random. There was cold logic behind it. In a world rapidly falling under European dominion, her Madagascar remained. Independent, intact, feared, where African kingdoms fell to European guns. She had thousands of warriors trained in traditional combat, spies in every village, and an economy built on control. European envoys complained of being denied food, mistreated, imprisoned, or driven back to the coast. Yet none could justify war. She played politics with venom-tipped precision, letting foreign interests suffer without giving them the excuse they needed for invasion. Was it madness, or was it brilliance disguised as cruelty? Death without judgment in August 1861, Queen Ranavalona. I died quietly in her sleep, aged about 83, ancient by the standards of the time. There were no grand speeches, no monuments raised in her honor, just silence and the slow uncoiling of terror. From a nation long strangled by her rule, the streets of Antananarivo were hushed, not in mourning, but in relief. Within days, her son Rakoto became King Radama II and swiftly reversed her policies. Christianity was legalized again. Foreign diplomats were welcomed, modern schools reopened, forced labor was reduced. The island exhaled, but the scars remained. A legacy, written in ash and iron today, Queen Ranavalona I remains one of history's most debated figures. Some call her a nationalist hero who protected Madagascar from colonial rule longer than most of Africa. Others remember her only as a bloodthirsty despot who ruled through mass executions, torture, and fear. Modern historians tread carefully. They cannot ignore the death toll. Estimates range as high as 1 million dead during her reign. Yet they also cannot deny her effectiveness at resisting imperialism in a time when most of the world failed. In Malagasy folklore, she's both the mother of independence and the queen of fire. In tombs, her spirit is said to linger, watching, judging, waiting. Epilogue: the woman who refused to bow Ranavalona I is a warning and a riddle, a queen who outlived her enemies, outlasted empires, and burned her name into the bones of a nation. Was she a demon in human form, or the only one willing to do what was necessary to keep her people free? You decide.